You decide to start. You open the document, the gym app, the difficult conversation you have been avoiding. And then, somewhere in the first 90 seconds, before any real obstacle has even appeared, something in you quietly pulls the plug. You call this procrastination. You call it laziness, lack of discipline, a willpower problem. But there is a moment, measurable in milliseconds, where your brain makes a decision to stop trying long before your conscious mind has even finished the sentence. I should probably start this. And once you see how that moment actually works, you will never blame yourself the same way again. This is the story of the part of your brain that quits before you do, and why catching it in the act might be the only intervention that actually works. Let's start with a strange finding from the world of competitive sports. Researcher Samuele Marcora at the University of Kent has spent years studying what actually causes physical exhaustion. The traditional model said your muscles simply run out of fuel or fill up with metabolic waste, and that is why you stop. Marcora's research told a different story. In a series of experiments, he had cyclists perform a demanding mental task, a long, tedious test requiring sustained attention, before a cycling time trial. The cyclists who did the mental task first stopped pedaling significantly earlier than cyclists who had rested, despite having essentially identical levels of actual muscle fatigue measured directly in their blood and muscle tissue. Their legs were not more tired, their brains were. Marcora proposed what he called the psychobiological model of fatigue. The decision to stop, he argued, is not generated by your muscles reaching some hard physical limit. It is generated by your brain, specifically by a continuous subconscious calculation comparing the effort something requires against the perceived reward of continuing. When that calculation tips even slightly toward not worth it, your brain begins quietly working to end the activity, long before your body has actually run out of capacity. This single finding reframes nearly everything about quitting. The wall you hit is not always a wall. Often, it is a decision made by a part of your mind that does not consult you first. Now here is where it gets more specific and more useful. Neuroscientist Stefan Bode and his colleagues used brain imaging to investigate something called the readiness potential, a buildup of neural activity in the brain that occurs before a person consciously decides to act. In one well-known line of research extending from earlier work by Benjamin Libet, researchers found that this buildup could be detected in some cases up to several seconds before a person reported being consciously aware of their decision. Translate that into your morning. The choice to avoid the gym, to leave the hard email unanswered, to close the document and check your phone instead, may not be a decision your conscious mind makes and then explains. It may be a decision your brain makes first in the dark before handing your conscious mind a tidy little story to explain it afterward. I'm too tired. I'll do it later. Today isn't the right day. The story comes after the decision, not before it. This connects to a concept researcher Roy Baumeister spent decades investigating. Ego depletion, the idea that self-control draws from a limited resource that depletes with use, much like a muscle that tires. Baumeister's early experiments found that people who exerted self-control on one task, resisting a plate of fresh cookies for example, performed worse on an entirely unrelated self-control task immediately afterward, like persisting at a frustrating puzzle. The model was compelling, and for years it shaped how an entire generation thought about willpower. But subsequent large-scale replication attempts produced a more complicated picture. Some labs successfully replicated ego depletion effects. Others, using larger sample sizes and pre-registered methods, found the effect was much smaller than originally reported, or in some cases, did not appear at all. The scientific consensus around ego depletion as Baumeister originally described it has become genuinely unsettled. What survived this controversy, and what current research increasingly points toward, is something closer to Marcora's model. Self-control failure is less about a fuel tank running empty and more about a shifting, ongoing calculation of whether continued effort is worth it. Researcher Michael Inslicht, one of the most prominent voices questioning the original depletion model, proposed that what looks like willpower running out is often better explained by a motivational shift, your brain reallocating effort toward whatever currently feels more rewarding, not your willpower mechanically draining like a battery. This matters enormously because it changes where you should intervene. If willpower were a simple battery, the advice would be straightforward. Conserve it, ration it, do your hardest task first thing before it runs low. But if quitting is actually a continuous cost-benefit calculation running beneath your awareness, then the intervention point is not your energy level. It is the calculation itself. Specifically, the moment the perceived effort starts to outweigh the perceived reward in your mind, even though nothing about the actual task has changed. This is why the hardest part of almost any difficult activity is disproportionately concentrated in the first few minutes. Makora's research on perceived effort found that the sensation of difficulty is heavily shaped by anticipation and uncertainty about how long an unpleasant state will last. Once you are several minutes into the run, the document, the conversation, your brain has new information. This is survivable. I know roughly how this feels now. The uncertainty has resolved. The perceived cost of continuing usually drops once the unknown becomes known, which means the quitting decision is disproportionately front-loaded. The version of you standing at the starting line, doing the subconscious math, is working with the worst, most uncertain information you will ever have about the task. The version of you 90 seconds in already knows more, and that version is far more likely to keep going. There is a particularly useful implication buried in research on what psychologists call temporal motivation theory, developed by researcher Piers Steele, who spent years studying the structure of procrastination itself. Steele's model formalizes something intuitive. Motivation to act decreases sharply as a reward becomes more distant in time and increases sharply as a deadline or starting point becomes immediate. This is why the version of you planning tomorrow's workout tonight feels completely different from the version of you standing in front of your sneakers tomorrow morning. The brain doing the planning and the brain doing the deciding are, functionally, encountering the task at two completely different distances, and the cost-benefit calculation comes out differently each time. This explains why willpower-based plans so reliably fail and structural changes so reliably succeed. You cannot out-willpower a brain running a continuous cost-benefit calculation that resets unfavorably every single morning. But you can change the inputs to that calculation, lowering the perceived effort of starting, not finishing, just starting, shifts the math before the quitting decision even has a chance to form. This is the actual mechanism behind advice like, just put on your running shoes, or just open the document and write one sentence. It sounds almost embarrassingly small, but it is not really motivational advice. It is an attempt to manipulate the cost side of an equation your brain is running without your permission, before the quitting signal has a chance to fire. Researcher Angela Duckworth, known for her work on grit and sustained effort, found something complementary in her research. People who succeeded at long-term goals were not generally people who reported feeling more willpower or more motivation in the moment. They were disproportionately people who had restructured their environment and routines so that the moment-to-moment cost-benefit calculation simply tilted in their favor more often. Not stronger willpower. A rigged game. Think about what this means for the activity you have been avoiding. Your brain is not failing some character test when you delay it. It is running an old, fast, largely unconscious calculation, shaped by uncertainty and the size of the perceived effort relative to the perceived reward. And right now, that calculation is coming out against you. You are not weak. You are not lazy. You are a nervous system running a cost-benefit analysis that was shaped by millions of years of needing to conserve energy in an environment where most effort genuinely did not pay off. Encountering a modern task where the actual cost is almost always smaller than your brain initially estimates it to be. Tonight or tomorrow morning, when you stand at the edge of something you have been avoiding, the quitting decision will likely arrive within the first 90 seconds, dressed up as a perfectly reasonable thought. I'll do it later. I'm too tired. Today isn't the day. That thought is not a verdict. It is a calculation, made with the worst information your brain will ever have about the task, fired off before you took a single real step toward finding out whether it was true. The version of you 90 seconds in already knows more than the version